Hi, I'm Whalley, welcome to Lenscraft. In this video tutorial I'll be looking at 3 tips or techniques you can use for editing black and white landscape photos with the Nik Collection. Although I say the Nik Collection, I'll be using Nik Silver Efex Pro, which is the black and white editor in the Nik Collection. Whilst all 3 techniques are powerful, you don't need to use them all with every image, just pick what you think works for the image you're editing. Having said that, I'm starting with something that I recommend you do use for every single image. When you open an image in Nik Silver Efex Pro, it's tempting to start with the adjustments using the sliders at the top of the interface. Try to resist this. Instead, come down to the colour filter section at the bottom. In traditional black and white photography, we use coloured filters as a way of enhancing separation and contrast in an image. We can do the same thing in the Nik Collection. Watch what happens as I select each of the coloured filters in turn. Each filter creates a different look for the image. You can also control the strength of the filter to intensify or reduce its effect. In addition to the coloured filters, we can also control the sensitivity of each of the colours in the conversion. By moving the colour slider to the left, we can darken that colour when it's converted to black and white. If we move it to the right, we lighten that colour in the conversion instead. This can help create a feeling of depth in the image as well as balance out the exposures. When you make these adjustments at the start of your editing, it becomes easier to see the image as it emerges. It can also mean you need to use less severe adjustments with the other sliders. Currently, the image looks a little flat and lacking in contrast. This is a common problem when converting images to black and white, as you can lose contrast when the colour's removed. It often needs an increase in contrast to drive out the detail, and this is especially true in shadow areas. But just increasing the contrast with the contrast slider doesn't work very well. What we need is a way to separate similar tones in the image which will reveal the detail. If we look at this image, it's hard to see the detail in the foreground rocks. Most of the tones are similar, which makes seeing the detail in the rocks very difficult. There are a lot of ways to address this, but one technique I like to try is using the dynamic brightness slider with the soft contrast slider. When I move the soft contrast slider to the left, it opens the shadows and also darkens highlights at the same time. You can see this in the histogram, which becomes gathered into the centre. Now I can move the dynamic brightness slider over to the left to darken the image. Now, rather than a brightness slider, this darkens the midtones but without affecting the highlights or the blacks in the image. You can see we now have separation between larger objects in the scene, and it becomes easier to see the detail. Having made these changes, I can adjust the contrast slider to ensure there's enough contrast in the image. Notice how this creates a feeling of depth in the scene. If I compare the changes with the default black and white conversion, the difference is significant. But we don't need to stop there. We can enhance the image further by selectively dodging and burning. Dodging and burning is a traditional darkroom technique used to draw attention to selected areas of the image. When we dodge an area, we make it lighter, and when we burn, we make the area darker. In tools like Photoshop, dodging and burning uses a brush tool. But in the Nik Collection we don't have any brushes, so we need to use control points. We'll start with a simple example. Let's say we want to darken the clouds around the edge of the frame. I can select these by creating a new control point and adding it to the clouds. If I turn on the mask, you can see the area that's selected. Then all I need to do to darken the clouds is move the brightness slider for the control point over to the left. Sometimes though, it's not enough just to darken an area because it can make it look flat. You can often correct this by combining the adjustment with an increase in the contrast slider on the control point. Having created one adjustment with a control point, you can then duplicate it to apply to the other areas. An easy way to do this is to hold down your Option key on your keyboard, or if you're using a Windows PC, that's Alt. Then when I click and drag the control point, it becomes duplicated. Now let me show you how you can enhance the rocks using a similar technique based on dodging and burning. First, I'll add a control point to select the foreground rocks around the tree. I'll then use this to darken that area. I can then duplicate the control point to select other rocks in the foreground. Now if I select all of these control points, I can then group them into a single control point. The benefit of this is that I can use one set of controls to affect the entire area. Next, I want to bring out the details in dark rocks, which I can do using the Amplify White slider. This causes the lighter tones in the shadows to become amplified, making them lighter and easier to see. After this, I can add contrast and structure to further enhance the rock details. If you compare the image to the default black and white conversion, it looks completely different. I hope you found today's video helpful. If you have, please take a moment to share it, and if you haven't already done so, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. I'm Whalley, you've been watching Lenscraft. I'll see you next week for another video.